now another Tim has crossed your path. It's our third Tim of the day today. Please meet Tim Reed, calling in from sunny Florida, where he's hanging out while all the theaters are shut. Tim was my associate on Six on Broadway, along with Paul Tobin, who also programmed the show. And we spent 2 months together in New York, and he's kindly agreed to come on and talk about Vectorworks and how Broadway lighting plots work, and more importantly, himself and stuff like that. So before we even get on to light plots and things like that, it's important, I think, for everyone listening, Tim, that we establish, how people get into this industry and where you come from and what you're interested in and stuff. Because for a lot of people over here, they've never met a Broadway associate before. So you would actually be our first one. No pressure. Hi. Well, how did you get into
Hi, everyone. Like Tim said, my name is Tim Reed, and I'm working as an associate on Broadway pretty much full time. I try and do about 2 shows on Broadway a year and then fill that in with some out of town, regional, and my own designs in the meantime. So I don't know. I got started a little bit differently, but I started as a performer at the tender age of 5 years old. So I've been in the business for a very long time. But yeah, I started a little tiny theater in an old Radio Shack. And at 12 years old, I started doing some of the lighting things, literally switching light switches and rheostat dimmers, that were just laid out. No console, none of that kind of stuff. So it's been a crazy journey and everything else. But when I got into high school is when I really started. I was both performing and doing the technical stuff on the side. And I just really fell in love with theater and wanted to be a part of it at all times. So I went to undergrad, and I have a dual major both in performance and design. And I would do, a couple shows a year, both there and at my other theaters, designing and performing, which I found really helped diversify myself and really helped me understand when directors were asking us to light specific areas or actors wanted to be in, downstage center, why that was important and everything else. So I really do recommend that you take an acting class, that you take a costume design class, that you understand all those things, because it will only make you a better lighting designer.
more confident?
Yeah, for sure. And it really just helps you understand what they're going through when you're on the other side of a technical rehearsal. And, like Tim and I working on Six, there's so many times where we had effects and flashing lights that just take hours and hours of programming, but you don't necessarily need an actor there. And it really helps you to understand when to take the time and when to move on and keep up with what they're doing and go back and fill in some other stuff on your own. So it really helps you to be effective in your workflow and everything else as you go through.
So how did you transfer then from actor to designer and associate? How did that start?
Yes. So I kind of decided as I was growing up, I became an equity actor at the age of 18 and was performing, and I was also doing all the design stuff on the side. And I just really fell in love with being able to do the creative things on my own and really be able to explore and work. So I kind of decided I was going to be a full-time designer, and I left performing altogether and decided to go to grad school. So I'm probably one of the very few associates on Broadway who did go to grad school. A lot of associates don't. There's certainly no application process that says that that's required. Education was just important to me, so I really wanted that. So while I was in grad school, I started working at some regional theaters as well, just assisting or sitting in tech anytime I could. Anytime I wasn't in tech on my own, I would go down to Oslo Rep or the Hippodrome, by the school, and literally just sit in technical rehearsal. I would reach out to the lighting designer.
So many people say that, don't they?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
You don't know how that works until you sit there and watch it for a few weeks.
It's true. Because school is fantastic. I learned so much in school, and I highly recommend school. However, being in the room is so much more informative to really understand what they're doing. When you're in school, you're in such an isolated bubble, and it's their process, and there's a learning education thing, and there's time, there's people, and everything else. And when you get out into some of those professional worlds in the United States, we have a lot of unions and a lot of rules that nobody really teaches you at all. at all. So you sit there and you start to be like, wait, why can't that person do that? Or why is that person doing those
It was
things?
certainly a learning curve for me in New York because I didn't know those rules. So Tim was my guide for all of that and would just drag me away if he had to. Tim, we have
I'd
to
have
stop working now. Come to
I'd
lunch.
have to tell him to stop touching things, that he
Stop
can't
talking.
focus and light and move it himself. But I mean, and that's how I grew up too. I grew up hanging my own lights, focusing my own lights, programming, doing everything. And you really, in the United States, when you get into that professional theater, you can't touch it. That is the stagehands. That's a whole different union. So you really have to start to understand what happens in those rooms so that you can be effective at your job.
This is something that comes up a lot actually in the differences between America and the UK in how you get into lighting design is in the UK you can be an electrician and you can get into the industry that way. And in America you can't do that. Or if you do that, it's such a commitment to join that union and do those things that no one will see you as a designer anymore.
Right. And that's not to say that you can't be an electrician as well. Most people, when they move to New York City, will start as an electrician.
Right.
It's a fairly good paying job, and there are several organizations. You can go work at somewhere like the Public Theater where they hire a bunch of electricians and it pays a pretty good wage. And you're able to then be in the room with designers and associates and things like that. You're able to pick up those small jobs and help fill in your income until you can work more steadily as an associate or a designer on your own, for sure.
Yeah, great. It's good that those things exist. So then you were doing regional stuff while you were doing grad school, you were saying, and then
Uh-huh.
how did you get your first Broadway show, or is there more to the story before we get there?
So, well, either way, but uh, my first Broadway show is actually pretty funny. I was doing a regional theater show with three designers, and I was the associate. It was with a man named Paul Miller, who you guys will meet later this week, who is incredible. He was one of the best associates under everyone for years. Him and Philip Rosenberg were they were really known as who made associates what they kind of are today. Now that we have all the technology, and they were the ones who went through changing a lot of stuff over to digital, to the documentation things that we use and everything else. So they're really kind of the pioneers of modern day associate work on Broadway. And both of them brilliant designers in their own right.
And super lovely people.
Yeah, amazing people. But anyway, yeah, I was assisting Paul Miller, which was literally a cold email. I'll be completely honest. I emailed him and said, "Hey, I'm available. I know you're in tech." I totally Googled him and did the Wikipedia article on him and put some of that stuff in the email. And I think he was surprised at first, but I was like, "Hey, what do I have to lose? The most he can say is no." And I ended up assisting him on a show down at Oslo Rep. That was supposed to be kind of an out of town tryout, or a little bit of enhancement money. And it didn't end up going anywhere. But the nice thing is we would, after being in the theater from 8 a.m. till midnight, which is very long days, and sharing every meal and every dinner together, we'd also go out for drinks afterwards. And we were sitting there one night, and it was the costume designer, the projection designer, Paul, the lighting designer, and myself. And they were all talking about Broadway and stuff. And here I am, this kid in school, having never really been to New York, maybe twice in my life. And they joked and they made a pact that they were like, all right, whichever of us has the next Broadway show, we'll bring you along and you can be our assistant on it. And I was like, ha ha ha, that will never happen. But thanks for thinking of me. And sure enough, about 4 months later, I got a call from the projection designer. And he said, I've got a little show that I'm doing on Broadway, Breakfast at Tiffany's. I'm doing the projection for it with Wendell Harrington. And if you want to come be our assistant and sit in on tech, you are welcome to come to New York. So luckily, it kind of aligned with spring break. So I left a week before spring break, did spring break, and stayed the week after. And I went to New York and sat in on tech for my first Broadway show. And it was a game changer. It was a big game changer, and it was fantastic. And the show itself was not great. I think it ran for 20 performances on Broadway and closed. So it wasn't super technical. It wasn't anything really special, but I got to be in the room and I got to sit and talk with all these amazing designers and things. And very quickly on, both Wendell and Michael Clark, who I was working with, were like, this show isn't going anywhere. You're sitting in New York in March when every show is in tech. Why don't you go sit down with some other designers? And they were very good to me and called up Ken Billington, who you guys talked to yesterday, and were like, hey, can I come sit in on tech with you? And I got to go to Lincoln Center with him and sit in on a day at tech watching him work. And then we went and did Smash out in Long Island City. And I got to do a TV series with him the next day. And then they set me up to meet Natasha Katz and Ken Posner, and I met several of the associates in New York, and it just went really well for me. And afterwards, I sent them all emails thanking them very much, and then once again, when I moved to the city, I let them all know I was coming. And very quickly after, one of those associates reached out to me and was doing a small show, man by the name of Aaron Spivey, who was an incredible associate and worked with Natasha Katz for probably a decade almost, and is a designer now, very, very well off. But he said, I'm doing this little show. If you want to come out with me, there's not a high budget. There's not any of those things, but I would love to have you. So I said yes, and he hired me to do a little show at a regional theater. And I drafted the whole thing with him, and it was really hard for me, actually. Drafting does not come naturally for me. I learned hand drafting from my professor, and how he taught me to computer draft.
You did not learn computer drafting in school, and I bet you a lot of people listening might share, especially in the UK, will have not really been properly taught how to draw a lighting plan.
And I still feel to this day I've never been properly taught. I have figured it all out on my own and stuff like that. So there are a lot of tips and tricks that I can tell you that I don't use, but I know exists. I have younger roommates right now who grew up computer drafting and everything else, and they've got so many different tools and plugins and things that we can talk about some of those things. But I do a lot of my drafting kind of the slow, long way, but I know that it works that way, and I get the results I want. Someone handed me a plot of Jersey Boys. My professor was like, you want to learn to computer draft? And he went to his desk and pulled out the plot of Jersey Boys, printed out, and handed me a scale ruler and said, here you go, take this and draw it in the computer. And I was like, and it took me hundreds of hours, I feel like. But I sat there and I measured every line and drew the whole set and then drew all the lights and everything else. And it forced me to really learn. And I did some stuff very dumb. I took the long route on a lot of things I just didn't know. But as a result of that, I was like, there's got to be a faster way. And it kept helping me get better and better.
And you do I think you do have to learn the long way, and you do have to learn the slow way. Or even the wrong way before you figure it, because you just have to learn. You have to find your way around the workspaces before someone can come in and fully make you understand how to go from A to B really fast.
Right.
It's also so great to hear about your time in New York and how everyone took care of you so well.
It's a big family. I mean, the truth is we are a big family. We care about everyone in our community.
And people help. You just got to get your foot in that door the first time, and people really are supportive and will help you in any way that they can, as long as you can prove that you're not rude and you're smart, right, and you have a passion for all the detail, then people help you, right?
For sure.
So you drew Jersey Boys.
I drew Jersey Boys. I figured that out. Aaron hired me to do that little show out of town. And there were so many things I didn't know. Because just like over there, and why all of you guys are on here, is because no one really teaches how to be an assistant on Broadway, in regional theater, anywhere. And that's the same for the United States. No one really teaches how to be an assistant. And so I showed up and I kind of just helped out. I did the things that I knew how to do and took care of things, but it was kind of like how I was designing and working in small theaters and regional theaters myself. I was just doing the best I can. And shortly after that, he hired me to be the assistant on a musical called Something Rotten. And that was my first show being an assistant on Broadway. And I was so excited.
Who was the designer? Ken Posner?
Natasha Katz started as a designer, and Jeff Kreuter finished it.
Gotcha. That's it.
But I was also terrified. I was like, I don't know, am I ready to join the union? Am I really good enough? Like, I had all of those self-doubts, like.
We had some people this morning really, really taken aback at how hard it is to call follow spots, and who were really scared about and worried about coming in and doing it on any sort of show. So I'm hoping your story will help relieve. Well, first of all, it's good to know that everyone's terrified, no matter who you are, and it's the only, you just learn it as you go. And theater life is a chaotic life. It's all about trying to make chaos into order, and just know that you're always going to be in that position.
Yeah, for sure. And the funny thing is, too, one of the first jobs you'll have if you start working in professional theater, over here anyway, is as the assistant, you are in charge of follow spots. And that's something I had never really done. You kind of show up and, like, if you're doing your own one, it's like, all right, I've got one follow spot where the lead who's singing the song right now, that's who we're going to like. And you're like, okay, great. You pick them up and good. You're following them. I'm happy.
And turn it off when they start talking and you're done.
Yeah. You just remember the button. After the applause, it fades out. And it's only on there for the songs.
Yeah.
And I asked the associate at the time, Aaron Spivey, I was like, so, like, do you tell me who to pick up or what? And he said, nope, you're completely in charge. The only time you will get a note about a follow spot is if it's wrong. And I was like, oh, okay, like, let's go. Let's figure this out. And luckily, the follow spot operators were incredible. And I know you guys talked about follow spots earlier today and had some questions about sheets and why I did the stuff I did. When I started that show, my sheets looked completely different. And I ended
up... You're talking about sticks now, or are you still talking about...
This is Something Rotten.
Something Rotten.
Just in general, my first show, when I did follow spot sheets for the first time, they looked very much like in one of the, like, Steve Shelley's book or one of the books that I had from lighting. And it was like lines, very standard, who to pick up when. It had, it had a lot of words. It had a lot of explanation. And the follow spot operators who were up in the booth, who had worked on Broadway for 20 some odd years, were like, nope, too much information. I don't want that. And that's kind of how I got to the sheets I did. I would change it and they'd be like, nope, can't read that. Too many words. We just want it quick. We want it concise. We want those things. And slowly I developed sheets much more like what you saw in 6. 6 is a little unique because, and we can talk about that. I also, for you guys, in my folder today, I just uploaded the share show follow spots because that's a much more complete and standard look of 3 front follow spots so that you can look at that as well to see kind of how that works and how I set up follow spots when I do that. But really, that's about how the follow spot operators want it. And that's one of the things I really had to learn as an assistant is those sheets aren't for me. As much as I could type something up and I could read it, if my follow spot operator up in the booth can't read it, it doesn't do me or them any good. So I really had to kind of take myself out of it and take, your pride out of it and be like, great, this is a working document. This is for them.
People were asking us today, like, what is the right way to do this sheet? And I was like, well, there is no right way. There's information that will be always on there. Mm-hmm. But look through the Dropbox and look through these show archives because they're all different and they're different because of the team or who it was or what they needed at the time.
And sometimes your follow spot operator, I've had several who, are 60 years old and they can't read the small text we can. And that's why stuff has become much bigger on my sheets for them so that they can quickly see, green means pick up, red means fade out, that kind of thing. They don't even have to read anything. The name is very bold so that they know where it is. And there might be a little definition. Because a lot of those operators kind of memorize their track, just like actors do or anything else. So some of them don't look at the sheets. Sometimes they only listen to you. So if you don't call it, they don't do anything. So you really have to learn that. The other thing is, no one tells you. You get to see maybe one run through in a studio, and there's a good chance that run through isn't complete or that things will change. And you're doing this while on Broadway, they're going to be loading in the show. So you're going to be over there with the assistant focusing, trying to figure out, your mind's going crazy because so much stuff is going on. I have a great photo I can upload of us focusing war paint, and
the senior on stage.
Paul Tobin took it and was like, "Find Tim, where's Waldo?" Because I'm like laying over a hamper with like my head through a ladder trying to focus a light on me. So many times in college and stuff, you get the quiet, like everybody goes away. This is lighting quiet time. It's a nice dark space. You can focus. You have the whole day to yourself.
I've never focused a show in commercial theater with the work lights off. Ever. It never happens. They're usually holding all the automation, there's sparks falling from the ceiling. It's the brightest thing you've ever seen in your life.
Yeah, oh, for sure. And I mean, literally everyone is standing everywhere, and there could be big holes in the stage, and you could be like, well, I would stand there, but that's an option. So here's my hand, try and focus about there and do the best you can.
Joshua was asking you about spot sheets. Would you use different sheets for you and the operator? Or
No, I do not. So a lot of assistants will tell you when they're starting, they call from a script. They will write their script and they will draw a line over and be like, spot one on this person on that. I started doing that, and I very quickly learned if I can't call the show off the sheets I give my operators, then they can't run the show off of those sheets. So I learned I've got to be on their paperwork. And I will, when I sit in that rehearsal for the first time, I'll mark up a script. But after that, after I turn it into my sheets, I never go back to the script. And a lot of people would say, oh, you can't do that. But we get on Broadway, they will send you script updates and they'll give you new pages every day.
Yeah.
And I think it's from my years of acting and everything else, but I will take those pages, I will read them, I will figure out what the changes are, and I can kind of commit that to memory and know what that is.
It's also the danger is it's also two different things to update, and you might update one and then have a typo
and not the other
in a second, and then everyone is confused and everyone's lost.
For sure. And the other hard thing to do, especially when you're being an associate and an assistant at first, is as good as your paperwork is and as important as it is, when you're in the room, your eye needs to be on the stage the whole time. If you're not looking at the stage, you could miss something. If the designer's talking to someone and something happens on stage and the director turns around and says, hey, what was that? You need to be there to be the eyes on stage and know what it is so that you can support your team and help them at all times. For sure.
Yeah, Ken talked a lot yesterday about needing multiple eyes on stage. And if you're in a script in between documents and you're not efficient, then you're not going to be able to be those eyes on stage. Bridget's asking about the 6 spot sheets, I'm assuming, and why the column for the light brightness and iris size is the same.
So 6 is a little unique because we were using moving lights and intelligent fixtures, and about 90% of what the operator did was actually controlled by the console. So unless there was a physical change of intensity for them, it was all handled in the console. So they didn't touch it. So we kind of used their sheets more as a tracking option. There's very few times where they control the zoom or anything else. And in their column, a lot of times, it would tell them that it was happening in the console. So it would be more like for your information, if you're a full body shot, in a minute in this cue, it's going to start zooming into a headshot. So they're going to have to tilt up to make sure that they keep their subject centered in the light. The other thing with those 6 spot sheets is that is very much how we started and how we taught them. 6 was also unique because I made a separate cue list on the EOS console, and I don't know if you've uploaded or you showed that at all today, Tim.
We talked about it, but we didn't show it.
Okay. But we did blank cues, and I had follow spot 1, who was the front spot and always the front spot. I listed all of his notes and pickups in the note column in EOS, and follow spot 2, who handled a front spot, a truss spot, and a back spot. It listed all of his stuff in the label column. So we were able to give them a monitor up in the booth and readjust their screen so it just showed them their actions and nothing else. So, and my follow spot operator, one of them he has worked in every Broadway house. He worked on the
47
show
years or
before.
something, right?
Something like that. He worked on the show in the theater before Phantom was there,
Yeah.
which is probably before everyone on this call was born.
Oh, okay. Well, I was born.
So he's been doing it for a long time, and he was very hesitant about the console controlling it. He fought it. He did not like it at all. But eventually, and he fought the screens, he fought everything. And we had to do a lot of work to get him comfortable. But once he was comfortable, he's like, okay, I really do like this. I see the benefit. And it made it so that he really could focus on the art of running the follow spot and not have to worry about those color changes quick and the size changes and the intensity and balance.
Well, and I was telling him today too how brilliant you were in using, because I did say how it was tricky and it was difficult. It was a learning curve for sure for everyone. But you were so brilliant. Every time I looked around, Tim would have his comms off and put his second wireless comms on, and was up on stage running around, waving a flag, doing things, and letting the follow spots practice following him around. I barely saw him really. Tim was always running around with wireless comms on, solving problems. But that's
wireless comms have changed my life for sure.
Yeah, I never saw him. It's great. So let's go back to the show you were just talking about, Something Rotten, and that was your first time calling follow spots, right? And on a big.
It was my first time calling follow spots, really, kind of ever. And yes, I had done small things, but even when you're in a regional theater and stuff, you might have 2 follow spots. They're both from the front, and so many times if they're at a flat angle and they're up against a backdrop, you won't use them, and you use them more standard.
Yeah.
But Something Rotten was my first time doing it, and my advice was, if anyone ever says anything, they should be in a follow spot. And I was like, oh, I've got 3 lights. There are 30 people on stage. That's going to be a challenge. And that is one of the hardest things you will ever have to figure out, is how you zoom out when someone stands next to each other and you control both people, and you sneak out the other spot so that nobody notices. Your designer shouldn't notice that you do that. Nobody in the room should notice that happened. So it's this real art of when they open up and when they dip out so that nobody knows it. And then how they quickly get to the next person they're picking up. Really a difficult skill to learn. And the other tricky thing, and I don't know if you talked about this morning, this project is great that you guys are doing and practicing calling it. The one thing you really have to do, and I tell everyone who's new to assisting me in calling follow spots, is practice calling it out loud. It is a whole different thing to read those sheets and be like, great, spot 1's going to this person, spot 2's going to this person. It's a very distinct skill to, while the video is playing live, go spot 1, pick up, Bolin, go, and you've got to be prepping the next person. And you learn that sometimes you have to prep a spot a page in advance and be like, okay, spot 1, your next pickup is going to be green, pink, yellow. Spot 2, your pickup is going to be white, blue, red. And that way, sometimes you literally can say these are all auto follows. In Holbein, I don't know if you guys are doing that section.
So they have actually a video of the first verse of Holbein, and actually it's one of your fancy videos with the EOS cues at the top and them at the bottom, and they have the spot sheets for that. So that's like an additional. We didn't get to it today, but they have all those materials. But actually, I would love to all hear your advice on how, because that's pretty quick on how to fan people.
Very difficult. And what I did, luckily, I had amazing operators. And what I would do is I would explain what the next section was. And I told them that essentially only 1 follow spot would be on at a time. And anytime I call the next one, your automatic answer was to fade out. So we talked about that we were going to play a little ping pong match. And every time I called the next spot, the next one would fade out so that they could be set up for that. And I would literally have to say, spot 1, pink, go. Spot 2, green, go. Spot 1, blue, go. And you'd have to set.
You told them in advance all the goes are crossfades.
Correct. Yeah. So that my words were limited and that they knew to pick them up very quickly. Yeah. It's a big challenge at times. That's a difficult spot. Cher has some very quick spots. If you'll look, there are a couple numbers in that Cher show that I uploaded. That one musical number is 3 or 4 pages of follow spot pickups, and it's like a 2-minute song. So you really have to learn what to say and when to say it, and be like, okay, I've got to say that earlier next time. And you really have to remember that, because they're going to have to do it on their own eventually. The other really difficult thing about being an assistant and calling those follow spots is, one, no one's going to say anything to you. They're just going to expect to do it. Most designers will also expect you to choose color, and you have to go, oh my gosh, we've changed this. I thought this was going to be a warm scene. They've kind of changed it to a cool scene, so I want to change my gel. And you have to figure out when they can make that swap, and whether it's they're out and they come up in that color at the top of the scene, or if you have to do a crossfade from two to spot one with a different color in it, and where you can sneak that in without the designer ever noticing you're doing it, and everything else. And then the other thing is, so I'm this new guy, first Broadway show, never done it before. No one says anything to you. You don't get any notes. You don't get told you're doing a good job or anything else. I promise you that. The first time you'll ever get a note is when you did something wrong or that they didn't like it. And it's very hard to not take that personally at first and be like, oh, sorry, like I thought of blah, blah, blah. And like the trick to being a good assistant is take the note. Don't talk back. Don't be like, I can't do that because I'm doing this right now. Figure it out. Because I promise there's 90% of the time, there's a way for you to do it. It might be frustrating. It might make you go back an entire page of notes and re-swap who's on who. And it can become very challenging. But there are very few times when you can't find a way to do it. And if there are, because there are a few times where you'll need 4 spots and you only have 3, or 3 spots and there's only 2, I try and prep. When I was the assistant, I would prep the associate and be like, hey, just so you know, coming up, there's this person talks and I can't get them. So that he would know by the time the designer got there that, hey, we need to put a little bit more area light on them. Yeah, and you can prep them for, if you've done your homework and your research and you have your layouts, you can know that that's coming up so that they don't have to worry about it.
Ultimately, you just have to know the blocking really, really well.
Yeah.
And then it'll actually be really easy to solve any of the problems. But if you don't know the blocking really well, you're fucked.
Yeah.
So this is your first big commercial show. You do follow spots and probably a few other things. What are some of your other responsibilities, like first time out as the assistant?
Yeah. So most of the time, I'll tell you, you will do follow spots and focus charts. And focus charts is, once again, something I had never done in my life. I don't know. Nobody teaches it. Maybe you guys learned it in school, but I had never done it in my life. And I was like, the associate was like, can you do focus charts? And I'm like,
sure,
I will figure it out, because that's my job. And I didn't know. And I pulled him aside, and I was like, hey, just want to check in this. I've never done this before. Will you give me a quick thing? And he basically in 2 seconds, showed me in light right. He's like, here's what a focus chart looks at. Every light that we touch, I need to know exactly where it is and everything about the light. And I was like, great, I understand that. I have my method of doing it. Everyone has their method of doing it. I will tell you, having done 100 focus charts now, I cannot keep up in a computer doing it live. There's too many things on a focus day on a Broadway show to do that in the computer. So I print you can go into Lightright and you can print a focus chart thing and you put it in papers. I'll do it usually the morning of or the day before. I'll put dividers, because usually you're focusing in 3 or 4 positions. And I'll take my focus chart book, I'll have all the dividers, and I'll get a sticky note and put the electrician's name who is focusing that position, because you'll learn very quickly that names are important. And instead of saying, hey, you, or, okay, whoever's up in the cove, if you can call them by name, they're going to be on your side quickly. You have so much to do that you need people on your side, and you need them to support you just like you're supporting the designer and everyone else. And then you form this awesome team and you can make it happen.
It's so important. Even if you've never seen this human being in your life, you have no idea where they've come from, but they're in a harness and they're up on a truss waiting to do your bidding. It'd be like, good morning, how are you? Hey, I'm Tim, what's your name? It takes 2 seconds, but it is the most important thing that you can fucking do. And then, by the way, write that down on the instrument schedule or whatever.
Write it down, because I'm bad at
it. Because then you're in trouble, because you can't ask twice.
Yeah. The other thing to remember is usually there's a day of front of house, and you've got someone up in a focus chair, which I don't know if you guys have ever done that or sat in one, but it's literally a piece of plywood that's maybe 10 inches wide or 10 inches deep and 2 feet wide, and they've got everything strapped to them, and they're up in the air 60 feet in a horribly uncomfortable chair. Meanwhile, you've got someone over in a box boom that's hanging, foot wrapped around a pole and doing the same thing and holding on, and someone on the other side. So you've got three people who are horribly uncomfortable, who don't like being there, and they're all waiting on you. So you really have to be quick. And in my experience, most of the time, the associate is actually focusing. Very rarely with who I work with does the designer focus. That was different with Tim. Tim knew his show very well and wanted to focus, so he did that. And I was also the only associate on the show, so I was doing, both kind of the jobs of the associate and assistant at times.
Well, and actually, we were so behind we were unbelievably behind, unheard of behind. And what would happen is I'd actually focus one side, and Tim would be focusing the ladder on the other side, or something like that. We were like trying to do three positions at one time. It's kind of how we.
And then the hard thing about that is, then I still had to go back and document it. So then I wasn't writing it down when we did it live. So I would have to sneak, and in the mornings or anything else, I would have to go look at where we focused that system and make sure that it was documented so that the electrician could maintain the show and really keep it accurate on that.
So on Something Rotten, follow spots and focus charts, your main responsibility. What did you focus on doing? So after we get through tech and you're in dress rehearsals and you get an audience in, then what shifts? You're still working with follow spots and stuff, right?
So you're going to be follow spots all the way through. With a big show, Something Rotten also didn't do an out-of-town tryout. So we were on a Broadway stage, and that was the first time the show had ever been put up. So it was changing. The director was Casey Nicola, who has done Book of Mormon, did Aladdin, did a lot of these big musicals. And the thing I really admire about Casey, but that is really stressful for you, is he has no problem throwing something out and putting something new in. He will throw out a whole musical number and be like, great, we're going to try this today, and put it in front of an audience. And if it doesn't land, it doesn't work, he cuts it and goes back. And so you are doing massive amounts of changes and keeping it straight in your head so that they can function the best you can. So you'll do all those notes all the way through. The other really hard thing about those preview process is the designer doesn't really pay a lot of attention to the follow spots until sometimes the second or third week of previews, because they are so worried about lighting the rest of the show and taking all their notes, and they assume that you see what they're seeing and that you are going to take care of all of those things. So you'll get to this time in the process where you've done several weeks of previews and you're like, great, all things are going well and everything. And all of a sudden the designer's in a good place, and they turn and they'll spend a show just watching what you did. And all of a sudden they'll be like, oh my gosh, we have so many notes, or we need to change everything. And it's like one of those panic moments, like, oh my gosh, I'm awful at my job. Like, I've done all this wrong. And it's not that. It's just, it's the first time they've really been able to look at the brightness, the balance, the color that you're using, everything else. And sometimes you'll have to change. And just know that that is totally okay. It's okay to need to make adjustments to it and everything else.
Paige, to answer your question, so Tim is talking about focus charts mainly in light, right? Is where it ends up, doesn't it, Tim? But
Yes.
Paige, we're going to do a whole morning on this on Thursday, so we don't have to go into that now. But you'll get me talking at you again for a whole morning, for an hour, only an hour this time. Well, then what happens? So you're reaching the end of previews now. So on a show like this, they do what's called the technical lock, which is usually 4 or 5 days before the show opens.
Yeah, about a week or so, because they do. In New York, they'll send all the press, and they want to see and review, and they review usually the Friday, Saturday before you open. So just depending on when you open, if you open on a Tuesday or a Friday, it's usually the Friday before you'll do a freeze. And that means ideally no more changes are happening to the show, so that from then on, it's going to be the same way that all audiences will see it.
However, the assistant and the associate get themselves very busy doing what, Tim?
Well, at that point, we have to start documenting the show and being like, great, this is what happens, you know. So I will then at that point make all my final paperwork. And even if nothing has changed in the plot, you've got to make sure all of the updates have happened. And I just put a simple stamp that has a date and final or Broadway opening or something like that. Different designers like them to say different things. But you'll make sure all the follow spots are done and PDF'd in both original files. The Vectorworks drawing is all done, and all of that stuff is up there. Focus charts, hang cards. We'll talk about that. If you do tours and stuff, you do hang cards for everyone and all the positions. And then we do a whole day where we document all the photos. So we will come in, and I think you have a day on MLA as well. Is that correct?
So we're going to go into this all in detail, guys. But just it's good to hear kind of the gist of what happens.
So, and it takes kind of a week. I would say it's about a week's worth of work for the associate and assistant to kind of wrap up a show on Broadway. It's a lot of work because ideally from the paperwork that exists, anyone in the world who knows how to read all that paperwork could remount the show or fix it. And I will tell you, I have done 4 or 5 shows where I was not the associate on it originally. I have never seen the show, including 6, for example. So 6, when I came onto 6, Tim and Paul Tobin had been working on it for years, probably at that point.
No, it was we did the out of town in Chicago in May, and we were on Broadway right after Christmas after that. So it was 6 months, maybe 8 months.
But I did a stop of it in the Ordway in St. Paul.
Yeah.
And I had never seen the show. And I had to show up and focus the whole show, kind of cue and adjust it. And I had like 1 day to do it.
So this is the exact reason why you have to be meticulous and why you document things. And at the very beginning of this week, Tim, we talked about why a designer cares about having documentation for their show. Mm-hmm. And it's about protecting your business. And this is absolutely the best example why. So there's probably me and Paul Tobin are the only my UK associate had never seen that version of the show, so he couldn't relight it. So there was only 2 people in the world who could relight the show at that time. I was on a cruise ship doing a different version of 6, and Paul Tobin was it was Thanksgiving.
He was busy as well.
He was doing another show. So he didn't come at all actually in the end, did he?
He never came. I had never met Tim at this point. I had never met Tim.
We just had to say
I had never seen the show, and it was like, great, go light the show. And it was like, all right, here we go.
So you will be, maybe you one day, you're a designer, you're in a position where you're like, fuck, I've got to go recreate my work somewhere in the middle that I've never been, with a theater that I have no relationship with, and I have no choice of the matter. And unless I want to walk away from the show, it's going to have to happen. You're not going to walk away from the show. So you have to find someone like Tim who you can trust to understand how the paperwork works. And Paul Tobin recommended Tim. And then that's how you got involved in the show out in St. Paul, Minnesota, is you just put on 6 with very little time, because it took forever for the set to come in from Canada. I think you guys had like, a day and a half?
They extended the show in Canada 2 days. So we had the set even later than they had planned. So we spent Thanksgiving Day teching the show for the first time.
A show he's never seen before, other than the video that I sent him and all the paperwork. But
with a new programmer, I had a programmer who had never seen the show, had never seen the show file or anything else. And I had a follow spot operator who had never seen it. I had a stage manager who had never seen it. So I had to teach. Yeah, I had to teach a stage manager how to call the show. I had to teach a follow spot operator how to run the show, and a programmer to get everything updated. And it was like one of those things where you're like, you have to stay calm and collected and be like, I know what I'm doing. But usually that would be a designer, an associate, an assistant doing that in weeks. And it was like, great, we've got 24 hours. I'm doing this all on myself. And I will tell you, every break was running over to stage management and be like, okay, let's do this, this, and this, and this. And then like the beginning of the session, I would get on with the follow spot operator and be like, okay, so this is the section we're going to do next. Let me talk you through this, because while we were running it, I couldn't talk to the follow spot operator because I was so busy looking at everything else and talking to my programmer. So you really have to learn to balance your time and look forward at your day to know what's coming up so that you can give them all the information and be as successful as possible.
Get the information to the people that need it, for sure. And hey, Tim, maybe it's worth talking, because like I've done a few of these jobs as well as an associate, where you get kind of just sent out to just make it work, and you have no idea what you're going into. Actually, that Paramore video that you guys watched, the opening of, I got invited to the Dropbox on the changeover on the flight there. I knew nothing about the show, so I landed and I had to focus it the next day. It was like 400, literally 400 source forwards. That's such a big show. But Tim, so maybe talk to us a little bit about like what is, so to prepare for a moment like that. Like you've got a day to prepare, 2 days. Like what do you open? How do you figure out? How do you teach yourself a show that you've never seen before?
So if I've never seen a show, and like literally on the airplane, the first thing I'm going to do is open a plot and look at it. And I don't try and memorize it. I don't try and learn everything there is about it, because you're not going to be able to. Some associate has spent hours and hours going back and forth with the designer, the scenic designer, and everything else to get that to where it is. But what I do is I make sure I understand what every symbol is on there, and understand kind of the basic of what's going on, what the set looks like, where the lighting positions are, what type of lights you have, and I will pay a lot of attention to if there's something I don't know. If there is a bubble machine or cryojets or some kind of drop box or some kind of effect or something that is out of
like a kabuki sort of thing.
Yeah, if there's anything that I can't look at it and be like, that's a source 4, that's a moving light, that's this, I make sure I pay attention to those things, because I know if we have that in our plot, it means there's going to be some kind of effect or something special in the show that in tech they're going to ask me about, and I'm going to have no idea what it is if I don't look at that and see that that's on the plot.
Yeah.
So once I kind of familiarize myself with the plot, the next thing I'll do is I'll go to Lightwrite and make sure that all the information I need is there, that focus charts are complete, that there is all the right information that you need. And I will, at that point, make sure everything's PDF, because I have switched over to an iPad almost exclusively for my shows, trying to save a little bit of paper. So I make sure everything's PDF, and I can pull it up on my iPad and carry one product around with me and swap back and forth between the plot, the Lightwrite, the magic sheets, the focus charts, and everything, and have that information at my fingertips very quickly. And then I make sure that I know how they focus it, like that there are foot markings. And the other really important thing to learn is what they are calling their zero line. I don't know how much you guys have talked about that.
Just touched on it, but yeah, we'll cover that more on Thursday, guys. Don't worry.
Okay. So you're always going to have a center line, and that is almost always, I don't think I've ever seen the center line adjust on any set. That should just be the middle of it. However, the plaster line, that 0, changes drastically on some shows, because some shows you'll use 0 as the front of the deck. Sometimes you'll use it as the actual plaster line. Sometimes there's a plaster line and then there's a smoke pocket and a house curtain, and you're not allowed to put anything in a tour. So your center line will actually be moved upstage. We had that issue on 6 in St. Paul. Is the center line was based on how the set fit in Chicago. However, we were in a new space with the same thing, and because of the way their pit worked on the front of it, in order to get the stage on, the whole thing shifted up. So the plaster line was about 1.3 feet upstage of where the scenic 0 line was. And it caused a little bit of problems at first, because the theater themselves started hanging the overheads based on their 0 line and not the show's 0 line. And there was no scenic designer going out or anything else. And it was one of the very first things I looked at and was like, something is not right. And we had to make an adjustment quickly before the set ever got in, so that we could make that all work. Because I also had our carpenter, Andy, who came with us to Broadway, had never seen the show either. Yeah. So it was very quickly like I had to grasp those things that I'm going to need to do first and make sure they're right and in place, and that we're all on the same page.
Definitely something that I'll always do, especially if it's some British designers don't document as well as like an American show would. So sometimes when you're inheriting a show that you've never seen, you have to just go figure it out. Like I'll have some screens set up, have the video, because there's usually a video nowadays, the video of the show, and then the show file in front of me. and you literally, and a script, and you just go through, you usually at least have those three things, and you have to just go through the video. Every time a cue happens, hit next on the EOS offline, and just make sure you understand everything, like where the moving lights are pointing and what they're doing. Find them in the video, go, okay, I think that's what that's doing. That's that moving light focus. That's a special, it can be like without those things documented, that's kind of what you're left to do. And
and when you guys talk about MLA, you'll see how useful that has become, because I'll check the MLA file and make sure things are labeled in a way I understand it. And I can quickly with that file, and I've set up a lot of tours, and tours we, kind of set up with that MLA file to be like, you can focus this show in an hour with the moving lights. And I'll go through and check those. He'll explain that when you go into MLA, but you can set priorities on things that have to be done right away or that shouldn't need to be touched. So I kind of grasp what are specials and what I really need to look at versus what should hopefully hold.
Well, we've been talking for an hour. It's flown by. I wondered now, Tim, if you we can get stuck into Vectorworks if you want, but also I thought maybe it'd be fun too to just talk about what it's like working. So we've talked about you coming into Six, a show that already exists, but what is it like working on a show that's brand new? I don't know if you got involved in Frozen from the beginning, or another example of a show, or Share, I suppose, or something like that. But like, there's definitely differences in inheriting a show that exists, and all the knowledge and information is there. You just have to decipher it and pick it apart and figure out the things that are missing. And then there's a different kind of experience, which is coming into a big brand new show that might have a year in development that you're on contract for, or wherever, or on Six where you're just employed a day before. But like, what's that like then?
Have you talked about kind of in the United States, what's the role of the first assistant versus the second assistant? And
I touched on it, but I said I didn't. I don't know what a moving light assistant necessarily does in today's day and age, so we didn't really get into that. But
that's kind of gone away. So they'll talk a lot about the moving light assistant, but for the most part, that's completely gone away.
Yeah.
But in the United States, in our union, there is no official delineation of an associate. An associate doesn't exist. That's kind of an honorary title. And the reason we'll use that a lot of the times is it kind of means that you can act in discretion of the designer. It's just to kind of help you with the director and producer in the room. A lot of times you'll get to a point where a designer is busy and doing 5 shows at once, and they'll have a different associate on every project, and they'll have to leave you in the room sometimes. I was doing Cher, and Kevin Adams, the lighting designer, got sick, and I was the only one in the room. So you have to have the trust and the faith of the director. So that's kind of why we'll do that. But really, when you have the designers over the entire show and really pays attention to the visual aspects, the associate kind of takes on a lot of the technical roles. They are the ones who are going to be up on the technology. I find all the new lights and most of the lighting demos and stuff I'm the one going to and then suggesting those to the designer, not the other way around. So we'll set up a lot of demos to see new products and stuff. But I'll do, as the associate, I usually draw the whole show. I make all the paperwork. I do the light right. I hand that off to the electrician, make sure they're all set. I focus the whole show. And several times, the designer, the first time they're in the room is when they're ready to say, channel 1 at full. And you're kind of responsible for all of those things up to that point. And I always say, as the associate, my biggest job is to make the designer look good. As the assistant, you're going to do the follow spots and everything else, and you're really helping the associate most of the time. There are some designers who don't really talk to the assistant. That was kind of an infamous thing for a long time, is that the assistant was kind of left on their own and they really helped the associate.
all right.
So I always say, as an assistant, your job is to make the associate look good. As an associate, your job is to make the designer look good. But yeah, so when you're starting a new show, it is a very different thing. And I will tell you, I work primarily with Natasha Katz, Ken Posner, and Kevin Adams. And the 3 of them are vastly different in the things both that they do in the room and the way they react with associates and the expectations they have of all of their associates. So Frozen, for example, I was hired 2.5 years before the show ever came to Broadway. I knew about that It was Disney, so we did a lot of labs. We rented a rehearsal space, and we kind of set up some demos of both lighting products and other instruments to try and do some of the magic and the effects and the looks that we had going on in the show. But generally speaking, I would say you don't have 2.5 years. That's a unique situation. I typically come onto a project about 9 months before it would land on Broadway or their out-of-town tryout. And generally speaking, the designer will call you and be like, hey, I have an upcoming project. And they might not even tell you what it is. Several times I've signed onto a show not knowing what the show is. And they're like, I would like you to be the associate, and we need to make a light plot in a week, which can be really intimidating, not knowing what the show is, not having a script, not knowing any of those things. Most of what you'll do in regional theater is you have the script, you have the given circumstances, you can see all of the things. But on Broadway, a lot of times the script isn't written when you come on to the show. So a lot of times, let's say with Natasha Katz, I've done several shows with her, and she likes to sit down and have a meeting about the show. She'll sit down and we'll print out a ground plan of both the theater and of the set, and she will kind of draw her areas on it. She'll just do little circles and be like, great, with this set, we're doing 5 areas across downstage, 4, 3, 2, if it goes up or whatever else. And we'll establish kind of our acting zones. And then she'll be like, I want to do a 2-color front light system from the box boom. I want to do a template front system, and I'll just kind of write these things on the piece of paper, and we're going to want a side light and backlight on everything. And then I'll go away, and I'll have to draw up all of that and figure out what both the beam angles, the sizes, what box boom they have to come from, everything else. And the other unique thing about most of those is there are no electrics. Like when you're in college or stuff, a lot of times it's like the first electric is here, the second electric is here, the third electric is here. On Broadway, you go into an empty shell. So you have to put every batten where you need it, and you have to decide, are we using truss? Are these moving or anything else? And you choose where they go. And you can negotiate that with scenery. You'll have those conversations with the associate scenic designer and be like, hey, can we swap where this portal is so that we can get lights in here? Can we expand this? Can we shrink this? And you have to have a lot of that negotiation with them to try and make it all fit into the allotted space you have. But yeah, so I will usually have a conversation with the designer, quickly see what they're going for. We also talk budget at the beginning. And a lot of times I won't, as the associate, know exactly what the budget is, but we get a rough estimate if this show can be done all with moving lights, or this show is going to have to be done exclusively with Licos, or we might have a few specials.
And the budget, just so everyone knows, the budget is usually, well, there is an upfront cost associated with any of this. Like the budget is really the running budget. Like what is the weekly lighting hire? Like a mid-scale Broadway musical, Tim, would be what, $8,000 a week?
Probably closer to 10, but yeah, a musical.
And 6.
Most of mine, I've done big musicals, so most of my shows are about $15,000 a week.
Yeah.
In just running. That doesn't count for new bulbs. That doesn't count for new gel or color. That doesn't count for any of that.
No crew.
No crew, nothing. Just the equipment to be in the room. And that covers everything from the console, from the power and dimmers, to all the cable, all the lighting, everything in the room. It is an empty box. You have to bring everything in. So I will do a rough plot. I'll get that. And once I kind of have a rough plot, I usually send that back to the designer to do a red line, and typically it is not a finished plot. Usually when I send it to the designer, it does not have a nice, pretty title block. It doesn't have everything laid out great. It will be messy. And I'm okay with that because it's going to change. It doesn't have any numbers. It doesn't have instrument schedule. It has none of that stuff when I send it to them. Sometimes in Vectorworks, I'll turn on the purpose tab and put a little purpose on it so that the designer can see what it says if it's conventional. This is the cool front light. This is the warm front light. This is, the template or anything else so that they can quickly look and see, okay, I've got all my areas covered and everything like that. But I send that to them and they will do a quick look over. Natasha likes to really look at it. Ken Posner likes to trust you. He does not, he's kind of famous for saying that he doesn't want to work with a new associate at this point in his life. He's established it, and he wants people who he knows and trusts and can do the job, which can make it difficult to get in with someone, but I understand it too. It's a lot of pressure in that room, so they want someone who they know can do it. Meanwhile, Kevin Adams talks much more about like, oh, I want to have a stronger backlight, so let's move all of our wash lights up left and let's do something crazy and adjust it. So then I'll take the plot and readjust all the things to what they've talked about, fill in the things that they like. And once that's kind of established, and I'll maybe send that back and forth a few times, getting the adjustments, then I still haven't even done a drawing, in my opinion. I still have ideas on a page. The next thing we have to do is we have to make what's called a shop order. And do you talk about this another day, a shop order?
I've showed an example, but we haven't gone into detail on it.
Okay. I can upload a shop order as well if you guys want to look at that.
There's a bunch in various show Dropboxes.
There are a bunch? Okay, great.
Yeah, but
so the next thing we'll have to do is a shop order. And the reason we do this out of order a lot of the times is because we still have no guarantee that any of that equipment that I've drawn, any of those ideas that we can afford or do. So that's why I haven't done a pretty drawing at that point. That's why I haven't cleaned anything up. We have to then type in every control system, every conventional light, every barrel, you know, the lensing to all of it, every gel, if there's going to be special gobo loads or anything else, and send it to a shop, and they're going to bid on it. And they're going to come back with an astronomical number, almost always. And they're going to say, and then your producer is going to say, this is way too much money, we can't afford it, you have to cut things. And then you play this big negotiation game of cutting things down and adjusting. Sometimes you have to swap what lights you use. The shop will also negotiate that based on the project that you're doing. If it is a high profile project that they think is going to run, they're more likely to give you newer lighting instruments. And you can be like, hey, I want to buy 100 new of these and put them on set. If it's something that is a play or limited run, they're not going to buy anything new for you. So you're going to have to kind of understand what's on a shelf and have a relationship with the shop as well, because they're going to go, you get no Mac Vipers, but we've got these VL3500s sitting on the shelf. Can you use those? And then you have to have those conversations with the designer and be like, hey, we can get the quantity of lights you want if we swap what type of light you have. Or if they're very passionate about having that specific light, you're then going to have to make cuts to your plot and adjust what and how many you want to use. So you're going to go back and forth with that negotiation for quite a while. And it can be very frustrating because each time you get a thing or an adjustment, you kind of have to redraw the plot all over again and refigure it out so that you make sure you have enough stuff. And when you start cutting down moving lights, you have to then supplement it with conventionals to make sure that you can light everything you need to. So it becomes this big balancing act of those documents of both your light and of your vector works and your shop order to get the things that you need. One of the other big challenges there is sometimes you will have options and you'll have 3 different options. So sometimes I'll have 3 or 4 drawings of possibility of ways that we could run this show or lay out this show with the instrumentation that we get. And I'll do a version that goes, all right.
So, the show is getting bid on between 3 different lighting shops. So you're kind of working on 3 different realities here until the producer decides what shop they're going to go with.
Mm-hmm. And Christy might have the Vera lights, and PRG might have the Kansas, and 4-Wall might have something else. And you literally have to draw it 3 times, so 3 different instrumentation. And each time someone bids back with swaps, you have to adjust that. And it can be a little bit of a mind fuck, pardon my language, but it can be really frustrating to kind of say, and you really have to update those things. I'll use my iPad on everything so that I have a running list of what changed, what came back, what each shop is doing, and I will have a lot of conversation with the designer, be like, if we do it this way, we're sacrificing X, Y, and Z. If we do it this way, we're sacrificing these things. And at the end of the day, they will have to make that final decision about quantity, type, everything else, and which way we're going to run.
Jason is asking, do you start with your dream fixtures? Yeah. Well, and also
most of the time,
but you also probably have in the back of your head, right? Are we an $8,000 a week musical, $10,000 a week musical?
Yeah.
Like you'd be irresponsible not to have those conversations with your general manager first.
And by the time you're being an associate on Broadway, you've been the assistant on several, you have probably done several tours, and you start to understand about what things cost. Someone like Ken Billington knows exactly what things cost, and he can do a drawing and he'll be like, this is going to, Darren or whoever is going to come back, and this is going to be the cost of this plot. I know exactly what it is. A lot of people also ask me, do I beef up my plot? Do I add extra things so that I am able to cut? And I will say, I don't really do that. It may be a little far-fetched, and of course, when I'm drawing it, I know where I'll cut first. I kind of do a little bit of a wish list, kind of front of house, like more movers front of house. I know I can change these to Licos later. Or I might do more on the balcony rail, with those being easy cuts. Sometimes I also do different types where I go, I would really like to use Mac Vipers, or we're going to try and do this with a whole LED rig, and know that I am probably going to have to swap these lights back. So yeah, you have that in the back of your mind, but I try not to sacrifice at the beginning, because my responsibility is to the designer and to give them the best possible plot and equipment I can come up with. So yeah, I really try and get them the things that both they need and maybe want.
Well, that's great. And then that gets you kind of back, that gets you into the room, and then you do the final plot, right?
So the hard thing is you have to keep up these drawings the whole time, because usually from the time the shop bid is final and approved to the time the plot is due is usually less than a week. So you really have to be on it, and you're going to have, or minus a week. For example, 6. We had our shop order going after we were already in the theater. We were still negotiating certain equipment, which is not the normal, but it does happen. The other thing to know about a lot of Broadway is you're creating something from scratch, an environment that's never been existed, a show that's never been existed. None of the reality is there. So it's going to change, and you learn all of these skills as you do more and more of them, but it's going to be different every time you have a show. There's no 2 shows that are completely alike. And yeah, you're going to have to really add it. And you start kind of developing your list as an associate of, all right, I'm doing this through Christy, so I'm going to ask these questions. I'm doing this through PRG, so I'm going to ask these questions. My designer is Kevin Adams, and he likes X, Y, and Z to be on his show, so I'm going to fight for those. Natasha Katz I have like kind of my list of things that she likes, and same with Ken Posner. And you really work with that.
And also to everyone who's feeling a little overwhelmed right now, like none of this comes straight away. You don't have to know this straight away. Like Tim said just a minute ago, like you are usually an assistant first. And once you prove you can figure out and not be just bulldozed by the follow spots, like just being in the room, you're going to soak all this up and you're going to figure it all out. And after doing a few tours and being an assistant for a while, then you'll start to figure all this stuff out. So like this is what Tim is talking about is being the associate, is after being an assistant for, well, how long, Tim?
Years sometimes.
Yeah, sure.
So, and I have cheat sheets. Every time I do a show with a designer, I have a little document that's called Natasha's Favorite Things. And I know that she likes Twist Ease pencils and that she wants those on her desk. I know that she wants a red pencil. I know that she wants the expandable eraser sticks. And I make sure she has all those things.
Can't wait to see my file, my dossier. Can't wait to see my dossier.
And I don't necessarily show that to them. It's kind of my secret, like, I have these things. I also learn how they like their monitor setup and how many they like and everything else, because you're responsible for the tech table layout. And I do a drafting of that shows every monitor. I think I sent one to Tim as well as like, this is what I'd do for you. Do you like this?
So in the 6, I've left in the 6 Dropbox folder in the archive that they have is your video diagram for how the production stuff. But maybe you want to
that's a whole nother thing.
is that not what you meant? But
well, that's part of it.
But yeah, maybe, I mean, I don't want to, maybe I shouldn't derail you. Maybe we shouldn't talk about that. Maybe.
No, we can talk
about that. I can, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, yeah, go for it. I'll try to find a screenshot of what it looked like in the end, because I have one somewhere.
As the associate, you start to become in charge of a lot. And on Broadway, we like to be a very self-sufficient department. I don't remember who was talking about it yesterday, but someone said they like to make their tech table area an area that people like to hang out, because that brings the director to you, that brings the producer to you, and you become the hub. So we really do try and make it a little bit homey and make them have things. However, on Broadway, we're not taking out massive amounts of seats. We're not bringing in couches. We're not doing any of those kind of things. When I've done Cirque du Soleil, we do that. We build a nice platform. We have a couch there for the director to come sit, and we really make a home. But on Broadway, it's very quick. And once you get into previews, they strike your setup every day and bring it back in the morning. So you have to be really efficient. What Tim was talking about is we have started, lighting has become very expensive. We start using a lot of time code and different things to really get the detail on shows. So one of the things that Anthony Pearson and I started doing years ago, before any of these stamp and other programs were available, is we had a video camera that we would just video camera the stage. And I had arranged a monitor so that it was just in the corner of the display, so it could see a little bit of the EOS screen and the stage. And we would record all day long. And as the assistant, I would sit there anytime they ran something on stage. I would be calling follow spots and starting the record and trying never to forget that. So if the designer ever wanted to see something, it was recorded. Now we've gotten a little bit more advanced. And when you have a big video department, they'll have all this equipment, so it's not a problem. But when you do a little show or something like that, I have developed a way that I put GoPros up, and I have a little quad box that splits 4 inputs, and I have an EOS screen. I have, positions from 2 different sides and the front, and we record that so that we can go back at any time and see playback of both where we were in the cues or anything else. It's a little complicated, not required by any means for a Broadway show, but it's become a useful tool that now I do pretty much.
Especially when you've got one programmer who's down on the floor with you to be able to look at the floor, for all of us to have a camera feed to look at the floor and to look at what the show looks like from the ends of the stalls, looking inwards from both sides, is really helpful to help focus lights and stuff. It's amazing.
And every show's different. For 6, the programmer was down with us. He also wasn't sitting at center. So it was important with the curved truss that when we were focusing lights and you want them all to go perfectly through center, he needed to be able to see from left, right, and center to make sure everything was lined up perfectly and to really help him with that. With a lot of shows, the programmer sits up in the balcony and they can't see borders and stuff. So sometimes I'll put a camera down low that shoots up, so they can see if anything's hitting a border or anything in the sky that they can't see from the balcony. So we do a lot of tricks and weird things like that to really help us out. And once again, it's not needed, but it's all those things to make you be a little more effective and work a little quicker so that no one's waiting for you in the room. Because that's the big stressful thing. You don't want people to wait in the room. So we've kind of done a little tangent there. But once you get the shop order all worked out, you have to do your final paperwork. And paperwork is one of the most important things you'll do at the beginning of a process. The better your paperwork is and the more detail-oriented it is, everything is going to go smoother for you, and the quicker you're going to be able to stop looking at the paperwork and look at the stage. If you do sloppy paperwork, they're going to have to spend a lot of time trying to figure things out, and you're going to get behind. You're going to not be able to dedicate your full time to the designer and stuff. So really do your homework and get that done. Because there will always be things that are not in your control. Tim experienced that a lot on his first Broadway show.
But
But sometimes if you do all of
but
that,
listen, the reason, but what Tim is saying is so important, because what it's really all about is getting the designer more time to plot cues. Like on any of these shows, on a musical nowadays, there's like 600, or there's well, let's just say there's 600 cues. Like let's say that, I mean, there's double that on 6, right? But let's say you take 4 minutes to plot each cue. That's 2,400 minutes. Divide that by 6. That's 40 hours. That's a normal work week, right? So, and no one has that amount of time to plot that many cues ever, ever, ever. So everything that you don't do your homework on and pushes load in back or prevents you from focusing sooner is cutting into each one of those cues that you can get plotted ahead of time before tech and get ahead of the show. Because God help you, if you get behind in tech and you run out of cues at the desk and the cast catch up to you, you're screwed. It's terrifying.
Yeah.
It's nothing more
terrifying. And it's like Ken Billington. Ken Billington is the master at that. He is someone who always is moving forward and just goes. He never stops working. He is one of the best examples of that I've ever seen in the business. He is always on the move, always going forward, and he expects if there's an associate in the room, anything that he says come back to, you have to remember that, and you write it down and be like, these are the things Ken wanted to come back to. And sometimes he'll do them. Sometimes he'll wait till he does another pass of the show and see him there. I believe it was him who said, if I can't take care of the note now, I don't write it down, because if I cared about it, the next time I see it, it will be the same note. And I thought that was very interesting. He's so in tune with what he is doing up on the stage that if he sees something and if he can't take care of it now, he knows that he'll see the same thing. And it's really impressive. And he's excellent at that.
Well, listen, we're now going on to an hour and a half, so I think we should probably wrap up the get to know the fountain of knowledge that is Tim's experience in his life. But I want to give people a chance to ask you questions for 10 minutes before we go on to doing. Well, we'll take a break for sure, give you a break from talking, and then we can go on to doing looking at actual Broadway lighting plots and talking about what's important about them.
Yeah, sure.
So a few questions have come in. VL 3500s, are people putting those on shows still? Natasha loves those, right?
Natasha doesn't. Kevin Adams is the one that loves the VL 3500 wash light, because it gives an excellent high-powered beam. When you zoom that all the way in, I still don't think there's much that matches that.
Great. Nina's asking about historic Broadway theaters and how you maybe alter them to put in lighting positions and stuff like that. What's that decision, she's asking?
So that is a really big thing. Front of house, you can't really alter. A lot of those are historical landmarks as well. So if there's really something that they want to do, it involves the theater owner, the producer, the designer, and everyone, because you are responsible for that. You have to pay all the money. The other thing is you have to restore a Broadway theater. So if you cut a hole in the deck, if you cut a hole to pass through a cable or anything else, when your show loads out, you are financially responsible to fix all of that. So it becomes a very big deal.
And in fact, the money you have to put up, if you want to alter it, you have to put up the money up front. So all that money gets put in escrow, basically. So the people who own the venue have that money ahead of time to fix it back.
Yeah. So yes, you can do it, but usually you're required to adjust to what the venue allows you to do. And I will a lot of times go do a site survey where I'll go and I'll literally measure how far the balcony rail is out. And I'll check all those positions and see if there's anything we can modify. If there's a front of house position, what we can get there. But you're really kind of, I don't want to say stuck, because anything is possible on Broadway, but it's financially a big deal. So if you want to make one of those kind of adjustments, you have to really be willing to fight.
But even at looking at Moulin Rouge on Broadway, right? Like, I haven't looked at the drawings behind it all, but actually they've managed to alter the look of that auditorium drastically without actually really going into the architecture. It's all drapes and cloths and bridges hanging in the auditorium.
And those things on like their balcony and the boxes and everything else are designed to sit in without touching the actual front. So they all like sit on the floor behind it and go up and over as a cap so that it covers it completely, but nothing is actually attached to the architecture. Um, yeah.
Lachlan is asking, is all that camera equipment your own, or is it something that you put on a shop order?
So I can put it on a shop order, and I have done that many times. It's usually one of the first things that go because that means the shop has to buy it. So what I have done is a lot of it is my own. On big shows, I'll try and get them to buy one or two pieces of equipment for the tech, and I kind of keep it because it always goes back to the show. On six, we bought like two more GoPros and things, and I've got a little box. I've got a little Pelican case that has all of that video stuff in, and if Tim ever goes and does it and wants that stuff, I'll ship him that box that has all of it put together, everything's labeled, and he can use it, or I will take it to my next show and use it then. So it's just been that slow acquisition.
Alvin is asking about previs. Do a lot of the designers that you work for do previs?
So I have very rarely done previs. Previs is very helpful, but a lot of times you aren't paid for enough prep weeks to have time to do that. I've done it really on Broadway on one show was On Your Feet. And we had a lot of flash and trash, if you will, that went around the things, but they wouldn't pay us to do any of it beforehand. So we actually weren't prevising the show as much as we were using it during previews and everything else to add in the effects. Once we got into previews for that show, I think our first preview had 7 light cues in the Megamix. And we would go down every night, and David Arch would sit down there, and me and Anthony Pearson, who was the associate on it, would alternate like, oh, I need to watch this upstairs, or I need to watch this upstairs. And the other one would go down to the basement, and we would in previs sit and write all the effects, just all the eye candy stuff over and over. And we spent every night doing it. I think David Arch would do some of it on the weekend, honestly. And we did a lot of that. The other time I use previs is on a show like SpongeBob, where we did it originally. It was programmed by Benny Kirkham on an MA for Broadway, and they had that whole thing. And I picked it up when it went out on tour, and the tour company that we sent the tour out required us to be on an EOS. So we spent, me and the programmer, I got the company to pay for, I tried to get a week. I think we got 3 days. Is all they would pay for. They don't pay for much time. So we went into a studio at ETC's offices, and we had an MA set up, an EOS set up, a visualizer, and then the video. And we also had a big cut down of the rig, and we had to go through and assign, what presets, what light was using when, and really try and make the show look the same with a vastly different rig, a different programming console, and everything else. So those are kind of the only times I use previs. We usually just don't have time.
Noah is asking, does the associate typically keep up a cue list for the designer on Broadway? Who puts the cues in the console, and is there a paper cue list as well?
So the designers I work with do it very differently. Ken Posner loves a typed up cue list. I have kind of gone away with it. I do almost everything in the console because the console is the one thing I know is updated completely. So I make sure that cue list is updated at all times, and I don't do a paper cue list anymore unless a designer specifically asks for it, because now on EOS and stuff you can do those scene breaks and different things, and I'll put on my magic sheet on the computer, I'll put direct selects that have those scenes, and if they're asking about something, I can tap one of those and quickly get my cue list to move, and I can find it in the things faster than I can on a computer screen. And I know that the timings and everything else are 100% accurate because it's what literally is in the desk in case I miss anything while I'm doing my other responsibilities. Also, once again, it allows me to look at the stage. I'm not needing to be in a separate piece of paper all the time.
Derek is asking about observing designers. And when you're young, how do you afford to live in a city while trying to network and meet and observe other designers? Did you have other work on as well while you were trying to do all that? How did you navigate that?
So my first year was very difficult. I'll be completely honest. I'm never going to tell you to do what I did, but I took out a student loan my last semester in school. And that was my move to New York. I grew up poor. I had no extra savings or anything else. And I didn't have a family who could support me. And New York is an expensive city. So I'll be completely honest. I took out a little student loan. I don't recommend that to anyone else. I also don't recommend getting into credit card debt. But I did that to move to New York, and I was able to sit in on techs and do it. And I always told myself when I had $200 left in my account, that was enough for a plane ticket home. And that was when I was going to leave the city. And I did one internship where I sat in with Kim Posner, and I sat there every day, and I packed my peanut butter and jelly sandwich, the cheapest way I could live, and was there every day. And it got close at the end. I was a little bit nervous that I was going to have to end my time in New York. But every time I did it, I was establishing those relationships, and I always got called for that next job. And it eventually happened, but it is hard at first. And that's why a lot of people work as that electrician, because you can pick up day shifts at, $30 an hour or $25 an hour or whatever it is, and, pick up your payment for that week on your one day off and then be able to do the other thing. Some designers are better. Kevin Adams is great about people sitting in on tech. He is really happy to do that. But do know when you come to sit at a tech that you kind of have to be a wallflower. And because people are working, and they're working on a very expensive show business, like it is business. It is very, very expensive time in the theater. So observe everything they're doing. If you ever see them on break, that's when you ask the questions. But you'll learn that reading a room is the most important thing you can do as an associate, or anytime you're in there. Watch what's happening and make sure you know when to ask questions and when not to. Because if you ask questions at the bad time, they'll kind of remember that. Keep a notepad with
we talked a lot about that on the first day, is don't make it all about you. Choose your time wisely. But it's worth saying, on 6 on Broadway, between you and Paul and people I knew, we had people in almost every day. And sometimes you had 2 or 3 people down into the table on headset listening, and that's so great. And actually people, not every designer is like that, but in general, I think a lot of people are really open.
And not every show is like that. And you have to understand and respect that. If a designer says you can't come sit in, there's usually a reason. There's a lot of times on Broadway, there's celebrities in the room and they won't let you. Or there's, with Cirque or with Disney or something like that, sometimes there's non-disclosures and things, and they just can't physically have you in the room. So the other thing is we like to sit you behind us, and that's a lot of times where the director will come in. So if you're there and the director doesn't like it, or they're having a hard day, or we're doing a difficult situation, I've had to ask people, like, I'm sorry, today's not going to work out. Like, we'll try and get you in another day. But sometimes just know it's not personal. It has nothing to do with you, but sometimes in the room, it's not the right time.
And also don't just go watch the biggest and baddest shows. Go watch the subsidized theater shows. Like go to go hang out at the Dunmar Warehouse or the Royal Court, places like that as well, because it's also a little bit easier to make an impression on something that is a little bit less of a pressure cooker and less political and less drama. Do you primarily use EOS?
I primarily use EOS, absolutely. For most theater stuff that we do on Broadway, it's also a much cheaper console, and the stagehands know how to use it. So for touring and Broadway, I almost exclusively use that. Anytime I do something for Disney Worldwide or for Cirque du Soleil, they're always going to use an MA. I am not as proficient at an MA as I would like to admit, but I've learned a lot more. I also have developed my workflow very strongly on an EOS. So when I switch over to Grand MA, I have to rely on my programmer a lot more to understand and really work on those things. But yeah, I primarily am EOS.
Another question about cue lists and the unions and having them on the EOS, and can you edit them, and how does that work? How do you negotiate that?
So it is kind of a gray line, I'll be completely honest. There are venues where they will not let you touch it. They will not give you a keyboard to touch it at all. Most people, that's part of the documentation and are happy to have you do that. But that's something I usually discuss with my programmer, not so much the house. Some programmers want their cue list and their notes to be them. And if they have specific things, I'll use the note column instead of the label column. And that way I can add stuff that way. We also usually have a conversation with our programmer about who's updating it when and everything else so that you keep that organized. We have formats of, oh, you're doing a musical number. Musical numbers are all bold. Scene descriptions are all lowercase, or I put asterisks in front of the music number, or etc. And you just try and keep that as clean and organized so you can once again find things quickly. But yes, I am very used to entering labels in queues, but labels is
Yeah, I never use this. I never have a separate queue list. It's just something else you have to update. And life is so, you just open EOS on your laptop when you're at home prepping for a show, and you just make your queue list there. Just do it on the desk, and then it's all in the console already. Trent was asking, do you keep a separate queue list? I think you said no already, but yeah. Time for one last question, if someone has one, if they're mid-typing or something like that, and then we should take a little break. Tick it down. 5, 4, 3, 2. No new questions. Great. Well, listen, when we get back, more from Tim Reed.